Hello and welcome. Are Africans expecting too much of America's first African-American president? Expectations were raised to new heights when Barack Obama was elected, but what obligation does that place on him when it comes to U.S. policy for Africa? The president's first official trip to the continent kicks off in Ghana, which he sees as an example of how countries in the region can turn around to become stable and economically sound. But this singling out of one success story is being seen as unfair by some other African nations who feel slighted by the trip's limited focus. Following Mr. Obama's speeches in the Middle East and the former Soviet Union, which stated his approach to relations with those regions, Africans are equally anticipating some kind of indication of how America is going to treat them. At a time when the global economic crisis has shifted the focus of the developed world, those in the developing nations are worried they might become marginalized. On today's show, we examine America's policy towards Africa under the new president and ask, can Africa expect the support it needs in the current economic climate? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and you can take part. We'll also welcome your phone calls onto the show. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is Democratic Congressman Donald Payne, a native of Newark, who was the first African-American elected to represent New Jersey's 10th District. That was in 1988. A past chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, he currently chairs the House Subcommittee on Africa and Global Health. From London, Tesfamichael Geratu, Eritrea's ambassador to the United Kingdom and Ireland, joins us. He previously served as his nation's ambassador to South Africa and was Director General for Eritrea's Education Ministry. And here in Washington, D.C., I'm joined by Reed Kramer, Chief Executive and co-founder of All Africa Global Media, a leading distributor of African news and information worldwide. Well, Congressman, it's great to have you with us. Now, President Obama will be delivering a major policy speech while he's in Ghana. What do you want him to say? How do you hope he will change the U.S. Relationship and policy towards Africa in general?
Well, I think that President Obama certainly starts with, I would say, a head start because even though he served in the Senate for a very short time, he certainly has been extremely knowledgeable, even in the state Senate in Illinois and then in the U.S. Senate and Congress, and even having participated in the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I think that he comes into the White House certainly more knowledgeable than any other president of the United States as relates to Africa. Of course, much more knowledgeable on many, many issues, but since we're talking about Africa, I just point that out. I do feel that he will, as he's done on other issues, he's taken a sort of a stance that's a bit different from what the United States in its past 8 years have shown. The style of the previous administration was sort of, it's our way or the highway, you're with us or you're not with us, it's one size fit all. And so I think that we have a president that is very thoughtful, extremely knowledgeable about the world. His whole definition of the United States and the relationship to Islam, that we're not at war with Islam. He went to the Summit of the Americas, talked about having a new relationship with Central and South America. In Russia, he's been successful in having a 25% reduction in nuclear warheads. And we could go on and on about his achievements. So I think that Africa will also get the same very thorough and thoughtful treatment.
So what do you make of the choice of just one country, of choosing just Ghana? I mean, what sort of message is that going to send to what is essentially quite a diverse continent? Was it essentially just a safe pick?
Well, the president has quite a bit on his plate in the United States of America. And I think it's wise that he limits as much as possible his overseas travel. There are certain scheduled meetings that heads of state must attend. And so I'm sure that when we can start to move the economy back again, start employment going again, having housing stabilized, and the president can get his health care plan going, move the climate change energy bill through that's just been passed. I think then when he has the luxury, I would even say, of being able to lay out a plan for Africa, I'm sure that we will see it. And so this stopover in Ghana is understandable because of the urgency back home.
We had a question from Eritrea, and I want to put this to you. It came from Reem Ramadan, who, a part of her email says here, I think we should now ask Obama, how free is your African policy from that of the former President Bush? And Ambassador, you alluded to this somewhat in your first answer, but you know, in the past there have been some disagreements between your country and America, and America's of course accused Eritrea of being or having links to terror. Now, do you feel, to what extent do you feel that President Obama is free of the legacy of President Bush and the legacy he built, or is he having to build new relationships from scratch, or is he carrying that legacy?
I think there should be a radical shift from all the failed policies of the Bush administration, in particular as far as the Horn of Africa is concerned. There are three dimensions that we need to see. One is President Obama and the new U.S. administration has to redress this position, this earlier position, by working with countries in the Horn of Africa rather than working for the Horn of Africa countries. And that's what Eritrea has been saying. Using geopolitical agendas to complicate problems in the Horn of Africa region, like the case in Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and the issue of comprehensive resolution of the problems of Sudan would be one aspect.
Right.
And then the other important thing is relating terrorism to the phobia of Islam, where Somali Islamists trying to reconstruct their country has been labeled as terrorists wholly. And then the third important thing is the way that regionalization of powers in Africa, by taking, for example, Ethiopia as the superpower in the region, has been the main policy option taken by the United States. These are some of the things that need to be rectified. And from the other perspective, we need to see at the whole issue of aid in Africa. Aid hasn't worked, so the U.S. administration has to seek.
Ambassador, sorry, I'm going to get back to you on that. Yeah, that's actually interesting. I'm going to touch on aid in a minute, but let me just, while we're still talking about policies here, bring in Reed Kramer. I'm glad to have you in the studio with me, sir. And ask you, you know, your all-Africa interview with President Obama before he set off on the trip obviously generated a lot of attention. He was quite emphatic in that interview, stating that Africa had to be responsible for itself and not dependent on the West. How do you think Africans will respond to that?
Well, I think there's been a huge outpouring of enthusiasm, first at his election and at his inauguration. There's a lot of interest. We're seeing it on traffic on our website, allafrica.com, and all over the place across the continent for this first visit to sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, he was in Cairo last month, which is in Africa. But this is a symbolic visit, and I think it does create a lot of excitement. It creates expectations, which are going to be difficult to meet. And he made clear in the interview that he wants to both continue what his predecessors, and he specifically mentioned Presidents Clinton and Bush, have done, but also chart a new path for himself. And part of the way he's doing that is the way he's making this trip. His predecessors have made an African, or sometimes two African trips in their time in office. He's included Africa on a global trip, a trip to Europe and to the G8, and he made a point of saying that was intentional.
I'm going to put a question we got from a viewer via Twitter onto our for our program, and it's from Abud Jumbe in Bangalore in India, who wrote in saying, if Obama is tired of excuses from Africa, then he should literally start strengthening independent civil society institutions in Africa. Now, in that same All-Africa interview that you conducted, the President also said he wanted his legacy to state that he had partnered with Africa to build civic and economic institutions that improve living standards and put Africa on a path to stability. But realistically, what can he do?
Well, there are programs in place. Some were begun previously and some are in the works now. When we talked to Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, Johnny Carson, a few weeks ago, or less than that, recently, he also highlighted the fact that this administration wants to work with civil society, wants to strengthen media, and wants to give other ways of supporting the growth of democracy in Africa, which is still fragile, we all know.
Okay, we have a caller, Abrahat, who's in Washington, D.C. Abrahat, what would you like to ask?
I would like to ask, given the size of Eritrea, this is for Ambassador Ghazi, given the size of Eritrea, there seems to be a rather high proportion of people leaving the country, an exodus, if you will. And I was wondering, how do you explain that exactly?
Ambassador.
Well, You know, there is a global migration as a phenomena, and there are some youngsters who migrate from Eritrea for economic reasons. But I don't think this is representative of the Eritrean youth in the country, where hundreds of thousands of Eritrean youth are still defending the country from external threats, and they are participating greatly in the national development campaign to revitalize the economy and reinstate the social fabrics of the country, of the society that was destabilized by the border war and its aftermath. So yes, it's something that we are always working to curb in a very significant way, but that's not very representative of the very, very dynamic youth populations still engaged in the national development endeavor of the country.
We have a caller on the line from Seattle. Jonathan, good to have you with us. What would you like to ask?
Shouldn't Obama adopt a retreat position of not sending foreign troops or weapons to Somalia?
Okay, Ambassador, your view on that, on President Obama and military troops to Somalia?
Well, I think that's one of the major things that need to be seen from a critical point of view, because what Eritrea has been saying in the last 16, 17 years consistently as far as Somalia is concerned is that there should not be any external interference. The Somalis should be given chance, an opportunity to reconstitute themselves through a national reconciliation process, through their own internal dynamics. I think whatever has been done through external interference would never have any positive impact in the resolution of the problem in Somalia. But as far as Eritrea is concerned, we have never sent any arms to Somalia. We do politically, morally, and logistically support the Somali effort to reconstitute themselves and reinstate peace in the country. But this is a sheer fabrication. On the contrary, it's Ethiopia that is arming in collaboration with the United States, that certain militia groups like Ahla al-Sunna wa Jama'a and some other militia groups, certain warlords, which have been very instrumental in complicating the problem in the resolution of the Somali problem. So Eritrea's position is very clear, and we have been consistent along that policy for 16, 17 years.
Right. Ambassador, I'm going to ask you and Mr. Kramer to stand by. We're going to take a short break here now. As we pause, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and your comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. There's a debate taking place in the now, as you can see on screen. We'll be right back with more.